Daniel Boone. Introductions. When Daniel Boone was born in 1734, part of it, now the United States, still belongs to British. He was born in Pennsylvania. At that time, Pennsylvania was as far west as most Europeans had ever been. The Americans and the British still fought over the wild land between the Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania, and Mississippi. Daniel Boone brought the American settlers into those lands for the first time. The adventurous boy. As a boy, Daniel Boone rarely went to school. He loved the trees and wild animals of the forest. He spent all his days in the woods, listening for calls of birds and footsteps of animals. He became an extremely skilled hunter. Though he was tall and sturdy, he learned to walk silently. One day, he decided he would live in the woods he loved. He got his ruffled whistles to his faithful dog and disappeared into the gloomy forest. His parents were not happy at first. Daniel often came overnight, but by the third night, they decided to gather a search party. The forest rang with the shout, but nobody had the luck. Daniel hadn't left a trace. Finally, someone spotted a tiny stream of smoke. The party found a simple cabin made of stick, bark, and moss. Sitting by the fire was Daniel himself. He was surprised that so many people were worried about him. He apologized, picked up things, and followed the party home. This was the first of many times Daniel Boone disappears into the forest, leaving his family to worry. The quiet time. Daniel's family moved to North Carolina. When he was a young man, there he met and married his wife. Soon they had children. He had to work on his farm to support his family. He had He had to live near town so they could buy goods. He didn't have many chances to go hunting in the woods enough. But one day, a friend of Daniel's returned from a hunting trip. He had been to Kentucky, which a part of the wild land being fought over. Daniel listens longingly to stories of forests with wildlife. From that day on, Daniel vowed he would live in Kentucky. Daniel went camping in Kentucky with his brothers. He had never never with his brothers. He had never seen such a beautiful land in his life. The brothers returned to North Carolina, but only long enough to gather their families and friends. They set out for Kentucky with nearly 80 people. The trip took almost 2 months, and it was dangerous. Daniel Boone and his party were not only people who wanted to live in Kentucky. The trouble sediment. Native Americans had lived in Kentucky for thousands of years. Whenever pioneers settled, they took land away from the Native Americans. There was a constant war. Daniel's Boone's trip was no different. When the Native Americans saw Daniels, they attacked. After the battle, Daniels mounted mourned. To find that his oldest son had been killed. The party finally arrived near the Kentucky River, where they built a fort. They built a 2-log houses in a tight square, all facing inward. They extended the back walls of houses into high, long fences. The fences form a solid wall around the settlement, but still the Native Americans fought for their land. This was not a pleasant outdoor life. Daniel Boone has a margin. The capture. Eventually, the fort ran out of salt. Salt was essential in those days. Before the refrigerator, the only way to preserve food was kill with salt. The way we do with turkey. There is a saltwater spring a few days' journey from the fort. Boiling its water makes salt. Daniel took several men and set out toward the spring. Once there, they were suddenly surrounded by a large group of Native American warriors. Daniel's Boone had been famous for defending his fort. The warriors were thrilled to capture him. The warriors took Boone and his companions all the way to Chillicothe. Chillicothe, Ohio. The trip on the foot was long and difficult. Along the way, the Native Americans became impressed with Daniel's skill in the forest. This skill was rare in European. Such a man was very valuable. Eventually, they took Boone and his men to Detroit. The city school was then a small outpost owned by British. Both the British and Native Americans were fighting the American settlers. The two groups had become uneasy friends. The Native Americans thought they would get a quiet reward if they turned the Americans over to British. But then the warriors arrived in Detroit. They realized they did not want to give up Daniel Boone. The leader of the British was outraged. He had heard Daniel Boone's bravery and skill. He wanted to take Daniel's prisoners very badly. But the Native Americans refused to hand him over. The rest of the men stayed with the British. Daniel Boone was taken back to Ohio. The Native Americans held a ceremony to adopt Daniel Boone into the tribe. They saved his end very, very short. They dressed him in feathers and ribbons. They took him into the river and poured him with water. The chief gave him the honor of joining the tribe. The ceremony finished the wonderful feast. Escape. Even if Daniel Boone appreciates the Native Americans' welcome, he missed his families and wanted to go home. The Native Americans respect Daniels. But they did not fully trust him. They didn't want him to live and watching the enemy again. They watched him carefully all the time. They let him go hunting. Let him go hunting. only gave a few bullets. For every bullet missing, Daniel had to bring back an animal to prove he wasn't keeping ammunition. One day, Daniel went with the group back to the salt springs where he was being captured. He knew his was his best chance to get away. But the Native Americans watched him closely as they followed the salt waters. Unfortunately, it was not just salt they were after. Now that Daniel Boone was there, they were scouting to make an attack on his fort. Daniel managed to slip away. As soon as he was run out of sight of camp, he began to run. Daniel ran after way back to the fort. He only stopped for one meal. The trip took 5 days. When he returned, his friends welcomed him as though he had returned from the dead. Sadly, Daniel's family had given him up for dead and moved back to North Carolina. Saving the fort. Even though he missed his family, Daniel knew he had planned to defend his fort. He immediately made a plan to prepare against attack. When the battle began, the fort was fully stocked with the ammunition and supplies. The Native Americans were defeated after 8 days. The fort, named Boonesboro after Daniel himself, was never attacked again. Daniel wanted to see his family more than anything. He returned to Northern Carolina, and they had the choice of reunion. After his long ordeal, Daniel stayed home with his family. He farmed quietly for several years, but nothing could keep Daniel Boone away from the forest, not even old age. He heard rumors of the land even farther west that he had not touched by the European settlement. His eyes lit up when he thought of the wilderness of Missouri. Again, he convinced his family to move. They settled about 50 miles west of what is now St. Louis. He lived there for his rest of his life, often going to the woods simply breathe the pure air.